I'm Dave, I work for the Ski Clinic. Today we're going to be installing a set of adjustable bob holes in a Superjet. So to start, we're going to mark it out and cut it. And the way I like to do it, it's very simple. Take one side of the bob hole, you set it in the tray, you get a nice line of where you want it. These are fully adjustable in the way that you can cut them up and modify them how you feel. So if you want it a little more forward, you can do that. If you want it a little more back, that's possible too. I like to set it to where this back edge will end up being this back edge. That's how we made the angle. So once we have it in place to where it looks somewhat where we want it, I mark it out. I like to keep as much of the hull intact behind this plate, that way it's more strength. We know we're going to need to cut just by looking at this along this top line. Now as you can see, the ski already had footholds in it. We will clean that up. So I'm just drawing it out. Now one thing I like to note is there is a plate that comes on the footholds. It's a board called Cusca. It's a fiber board. What I like to have is a nice 1-inch thick, rail once I'm done. So I know that this needs to go against the outside. So I'll just kind of give myself an eyeball line and just draw it out. And it can always be trimmed down. Don't be afraid to go a little bit bigger if that's what you want. So now, we're going to go ahead and cut the Superjet up. Once you've made all your cuts, nice big flathead screwdriver always does the job. Just start yanking and prying until it all breaks away. As you can see, like I said, somebody already did footholds in this one, so it's going to help us out a little bit more than usual. You find that as you're breaking it out, all the foam could come out, no big deal. It's easy enough to take out. And there you go. Nice big panel gone. All right, now you're going to want to take the foam and leave it flat along this edge here for a little stability, but you want to take all the foam out here all the way to the inner wall. Now I find the easiest way to do that is you take your Sawzall, make a bunch of cuts. This makes the foam a lot easier to come out. As you can see, you want to get to all this fiberglass right here. Alright, so I just want to show real quick what the measurement roughly would be if you don't feel like eyeballing it. You know, you can go anywhere from an inch, inch and a quarter. It just depends on how you want to line it up, but an inch is a pretty decent dimension to go by if you want to just put a measurement here. And then off the back of the boat, I would say from here to here, you're going to cut out a chunk roughly 16 inches. So you get an idea at least of if you don't want to go by eye, what the dimensions would be. This is what it should look like. You should see a nice wall of fiberglass there. That is the outer wall of the ski. That'll be the wall that we actually glue the inner panel to. So now at this point, you want to just kind of start test fitting, get an idea on how things are going to fit. You can see it's a little tight here. Don't be afraid to grind or cut any more along this edge. Don't be afraid to grind or cut on here, whatever you feel comfortable doing. The mold was taken from a Superjet, so for the most part, it's pretty close, but it does need a little bit of finessing. So for grinding, just grab a grinder and just start hacking away at it. So after test fitting, I can see that this area is a little tight into this. It's probably gonna be a little bit tight back here, that's no big deal. And then I like to grind this little nub off right here where it steps. That just gives me a little bit more help. So for grinders, I just like to use an Air 2-inch grinder. You can use whatever you feel comfortable with. You can see I've ground this down a little bit thinner. It just allows it to slide into the new piece. I've also ground this down a little bit thinner, and while I was here, I went ahead and ground this whole area here to allow adhesion for the glue. I also ground out any bit of foam or excess foam that might have been in our way and started to flatten it out. So once you've gotten to that point, you can kind of see how it's going to want to fit. It does have a little lip that locks over. Now, I like to grind this down, and I'll show that later when I'm done. So don't be afraid if you start to see that lip. And you can see it needs to be pulled in. It's going to be a tight fit, but the tighter the better on that one. So now that we got it all fitted, we can go ahead and move on to the other side and just repeat the process. This is what it should look like once you've cut it, ground it, and made sure it all fits. This is just a quick test fit. I like to use wood to make sure that they're nice and stout against the walls. What we are going to be doing at this point is this will go down below these inside the tray. This will come in the kit. So let's take this out, and we're going to mix up some resin. You can see just how hard it should be to get in there. You want it nice and tight. Now the other thing I want to point out is that we made it so that it clears the exhaust depending on how high the exhaust is. I made it extra high to clearance for most of them, but if it is a little too high, you can grind down the backside, or you can actually cut it open and re-glass it. At this time, I also want to show that I went ahead and made just some grinding marks along this edge here. Up front here also I made some grinding marks, and then I also ground down a nice solid area right here. The pump tunnel is here. That's where this piece will actually get glued to. You don't necessarily need to do a whole area, just what needs to be glued down. That'll give that nice and solid. That is strictly to help hold it. So now we'll go ahead and mix some resin. Alright, I like to mix up a full cup of resin. Always helps to have a lot more than not enough. I'm also going to make it a little on the hot side for my hardener. I want it to dry a little quicker than normal. Once you get it all good and mixed, you start by adding Cabo-Sil. Now in this case, depending on what you can and can't get your hands on, Cabo-Sil is the best product to use for making resin a little thicker, but you can use baking powder or diatomaceous earth. You just want to get your resin nice and thick at this point. And it takes a little bit of time. This is about what you want your resin to look like. Kind of Play-Doh-y, fairly thick. You just want to make sure that if you were to put it on a sidewall, it's not just going to run down and get all messy. And I like to put a nice big blob in the area that I ground down. And then put my board on, get it nice and settled in there. Like I said, you don't need to have this all ground down. It's strictly for a downward force, and everywhere I ground is right over the pump tunnel. It's at its strongest point. And then just a little bit on each side. Okay, then we'll take both of our pieces and we'll just cake it on the sidewalls here. The more the merrier. You want it to really squeeze in there when you squish it down inside the tray. You want to make sure it all squeezes out. This is why I said a whole cup always goes good. All right, we'll go ahead and put that one in there real quick. There's that and that. I should have put a little bit extra right there. Always helps to put a little bit extra if you see it needs it. Don't be afraid to get messy, it's always fun. Alright, then we'll take our piece. You see it squishes up, don't be afraid, we're going to grind all that down anyways. And just install the board. I like to use a board. If you have C-clamps that are big enough, those are always good too. I cut the board roughly to about 19 and a quarter inches is usually what it should be. Just want to make sure everything is definitely against the wall, which it is. And then let it sit to dry. Alright, so now it's all glassed in. You can feel everything's nice and strong. You should be able to hear here. Now you'll also notice that your rails have now gained all their strength back for the most part. Now what I like to do is I'll do a couple rivets all the way along this just to make sure. You want to make sure, of course, you don't drill through the bottom of the boat. So I tend to do the rivets a little on the inward side. Just confirm that you, of course, aren't drilling through the bottom of the boat. That was where the old foothold was cut in, sorry. Okay. I do this just for extra strength. Alright, so now we're just going to install all the rivets. This is just backup. I mean, this thing is plenty strong without it, but I just like to do this for a little extra bonus. Up here is where it really matters, because a lot of times you can see the Superjet sucked in right here at the foam, so it's just nice to get it back to a shape. Kind of sucks this against the sidewall. Just like that. Like I said, this is strictly an extra. If you don't feel like doing this, it's strictly up to you. But it's what I recommend. right, now that we did all the rivets, we're going to go ahead and do some two-part foam. Just like to do a little more foam than you probably need, but the more the merrier. Make sure it's nice and filled up. I'm actually doing a lot for this one. I want to make sure it expands heavily. With two-part foam, you always want to make sure that you stir it up really, really good. Otherwise, you get inconsistencies on how much it expands and how hard it actually gets. If you don't stir it enough, you can end up with a real spongy kind of foam. And always be quick with it. So, this is one of the reasons for the gap. It just helps get that foam in there. Like I said, I'm doing way more than I need. I like to just do it all over the place. So. Don't worry about it being messy. A little bit of mess doesn't hurt nothing. Alright, and then before it sets up, I like to just tape the seam. Helps that foam expand everywhere it needs to go. Now the reason I do the foam before the glass is it helps me make a little bit of structure so that the glass comes out a lot smoother. Fiberglass will just make a bridge right over it with no big problems. See how I kind of ground an angle in this just for a nice transition. The foam came up through here. I also like to put tape along this line just so it protects the paint from any resin that we're going to put on here. I also like to grind down till you see glass on the original hull. That'll give a good adhesive point for the resin to stick to. The other thing you'll see here is the foam expanded, and it allowed us, now we have a nice transition here we can work with. We're not going to have our resin or our fabric or anything dripping down in and making a mess and filling up a void. So what we'll start with is a nice thick resin mixed up, just resin and Cavlasil. Just make it nice and thick. You want it to kind of hold its own shape, you know. And I'm just going to plaster this stuff on. And this just allows me to get everything kind of nice and smooth. It's also going to kind of start a tack coat for us for the fabric and other resins. So you see any little dips or whatever, this is the best way to fill them at this point. So. Alright, and I'm also going to go over all the rivets with the thick resin just to make sure they're sealed. You don't want moisture getting through those at all. You can see I'm just creating the shape that I want the fabric to take. Best way to make any kind of shape is with this stuff. I'll go around all the area just to give us something to help tack it down. So you can see we went ahead, we've got the nice thick resin all the way around, made a nice transition, everything's nice and smooth and it's to the shape that I want it. And of course, you know, if you want to, do things your way, that's up to you. I'm only showing you the way that I like to do it. There's a lot of freedom in fiberglass and there's a lot of freedom in these footholds to do whatever you feel. Now I've already got all my crushed mat pre-cut in all different pieces, and now's the time to just start laying it down. Now a little hint with this stuff is wet it up, let it sit for a couple minutes, and then you can work it however you want. But if you don't wet it up, it won't move for you. then of course just a slight overlap on all your fabrics. You want them all to hook together. And then I'm just going to go over the bow eye hole for now. We can always open it up later with a grinder. Alright, so this is what it should look like when you're all done with the glass. You can see everything's nicely sealed. All the inserts or rivets have, fiberglass over them. You want to make sure those don't get any moisture. Now as for this overhanging glass, when it's dry, the best option is just to grind it off or cut it off. It comes off a lot easier. The other thing you'll notice is I actually went over the tape line a little with some resin. Don't be too bothered by that. All you have to do is take the grinder, grind to the tape, don't grind through it. Tape will peel right off. So this is basically what it should look like. Now we'll let it dry and move on. Now that all the fiberglass is dry, I'm just going to go ahead and grind everything down. You can see I've already started. You're just going to grind all this little excess that we left hanging. There's no reason to try to wrap that over. It's already locked on. So we're just going to give it a good grind and clean up, and then we'll melt the plate. Now that you got everything ground down, you can see I sanded every inch of the plates all the way around. It's all nice and smooth. I also sanded all this here. I'll eventually sand everything that's going to be turf because it really gives a good bonding surface for your turf. But everything's nice and smooth, and then I'll wipe it down with acetone. That just makes sure all the waxes and all are off. Now we're going to start to do the plates. What we'll start with is just marking out. I recommend 1 inch down from this line. Don't mind the holes, that's just something I like to do to make sure I get a good bonding surface. So I go 1 inch down from this upper line, and then just about to where the curve starts, you'll start to see you want your plate to be nice and flat, just like that. So it's more of an eyeball for this plate. You can always go forward, whatever you want. That's what makes them so adjustable. So I'll just eyeball where I like to have it. And then I'll mark out the holes. And mark out these holes also. All of our lines marked out. I'll take a small drill bit first. Try not to go all the way through with these ones. Okay, so that takes care of the small screw holes. And what I'll do is I like to drill holes all through the lines. That'll get us our start. So we'll start with the top. I'm using a 23/64. You can use a 3/8. I wouldn't go any bigger than a 3/8 drill bit. Kind of make sure you're centered here, you're nice and straight, you don't want anything too angled up and down or anything like that. I'll do 3 holes on the small ones, I'll do 5 in this big one. Grab it back. So once you have your holes drilled, like to use an air saw. You can pick these up at Harbor Freight. Any of the tool companies usually carry them. They're fairly cheap, 20 bucks, you can pick one up. So once you got the holes cut out like that, you can see it's not exactly perfect right now. I like to take, basically it's just a long grinder bit. You can pick these up at hardware stores and parts stores. I'm using an air grinder straight. You can pick this up at Harbor Freight too. They're about 20 bucks. Or you can use a drill with this fitting. It just doesn't spin as fast. And you want to be really careful when you do this because this could easily walk on you and start chewing through. And there you go. That is your first hole. Nicely done, nice and straight up and down. If you need to make an adjustment, if the drill maybe went in at a little angle, this is the time to do it. It doesn't hurt to have the inside a little bit wider, but you do want the outside to be nice and tight. It just looks better. Double check everything, just line up the plate where it's gonna go. Just make sure it looks good and clean. You don't want a bunch of overlap or anything like that. So just a nice clean finished hole. You can put a little bit of paint in there, it's ready to go. So just repeat the process on the rest of the holes. See all the finished holes? Everything's ready to go. Now if there's, when you drill out the holes, if there's any voids, you can fill it with a little bit of resin and Cablosil. You mix it together thick and just put it in, but these came out pretty nice. So now we just go ahead and get our plates ready. Always make sure the bulb symbol's towards the back of the ski. That's it.